First love. James Carter had built an empire from nothing. Once a struggling young man, he was now a self-made millionaire, living in a grand estate on the outskirts of the city. His life was full of luxury, but it was also empty, filled with business deals, charity galas, and expensive solitude. One rainy evening, as he prepared to close his office for the night, his butler informed him that a woman was at the gate, desperately asking to see him. Curious but cautious, James walked to the entrance. What he saw made his heart stop. Standing in the downpour was a woman, her clothes soaked, her face weary with exhaustion, but her eyes, those eyes were unmistakable. Angela? He whispered in disbelief. She looked up, shivering, and for a moment silence stretched between them. It's been a long time, James, she said softly. Angela Morris had once been his everything. His first love, the girl who had stolen his heart back when they were young and reckless. They had dreamed of a future together, but life had pulled them apart. He went to college on a scholarship, determined to make something of himself. She had stayed behind, tied to responsibilities he had never fully understood. Now, she stood before him, homeless, tired, and desperate. James snapped out of his shock and ushered her inside, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. As she sipped the tea he offered, he finally asked the question burning in his mind. What happened to you, Angela? Tears welled in her eyes as she looked down at her trembling hands. Life happened, James. After you left, I got pregnant. I wanted to tell you, but you were gone. I had a son, Elijah. Her voice cracked. I worked hard to raise him, but times got tough. My job barely covered the bills. Then I got sick, and medical expenses took everything. We lost our home. James felt as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. You mean I have a son? Angela nodded. He's at the shelter right now. I didn't come here for money, James. I didn't know where else to go. Without hesitation, James stood up. We're going to get Elijah, right now. An hour later, they arrived at the shelter. The moment James saw the boy, tall, with Angela's warm eyes and a striking resemblance to himself, he knew. Tears blurred his vision as he knelt before the teenager. Elijah, I'm your father, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Angela gasped, and Elijah's eyes widened in shock. My father? He echoed. James nodded. And you're coming home. That night, for the first time in years, James's mansion wasn't just a house, it was a home. Angela and Elijah had a warm bed to sleep in, a future to look forward to. And James? He had found something money could never buy. The love he had lost and a family he never knew he had. Beginning. The next morning, James woke up early, his mind racing with emotions. The realization that he had a son, a teenager he had never met, was overwhelming. He wanted to make things right, but he also knew that years of absence couldn't be erased overnight. Downstairs, Angela sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee. She looked more rested, but there was still a sadness in her eyes. James sat across from her, studying the woman he had once loved. I need you to know, he said gently. I would have been there if I had known. I never would have left you to struggle alone. Angela gave a small, sad smile. I know, James, but what's done is done. All that matters now is Elijah. As if on cue, Elijah walked in, still groggy from sleep. He hesitated when he saw James, but finally took a seat. The silence was thick until James spoke. Elijah, I know this is a lot. I won't force you to accept me as your father right away, but I want to be in your life. Elijah studied him carefully. I don't know you, he admitted, but I want to. James nodded, emotion rising in his throat. Then we'll take it one step at a time. Healing and adjustments. Over the next few weeks, James made good on his promise. He enrolled Elijah in a prestigious school, ensuring he had everything he needed. But more importantly, he spent time with him, teaching him how to drive, playing basketball in the backyard, sharing stories about his own struggles growing up. Elijah was wary at first, but slowly he began to open up. He had a sharp mind and big dreams, and James saw so much of himself in the boy. Angela, meanwhile, struggled with the transition. She was grateful to have a roof over her head, but the idea of living in a mansion after years of hardship felt surreal. She insisted on finding a job, not wanting to depend on James's wealth. One evening, she found him in his office, reviewing business reports. I need to stand on my own 2 feet, James. I can't just live here and do nothing. James set down his papers. I understand, but you don't have to prove anything to me, Angela. You've been strong for so long. Let me help you. She sighed. I don't want to be just some charity case. He smiled. Then how about a partnership? I own several businesses. You could manage one, something you're passionate about. Angela hesitated, then nodded. Okay, but only if I earn it. James chuckled. I wouldn't expect anything less. A love rekindled. As the weeks turned into months, their bond deepened. They spent more time together, late night talks, reminiscing about the past, laughing over old memories. One evening, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the city, Angela turned to him. James, do you ever think about what could have been? He gazed at her, his heart full. I think about it all the time, and I'm wondering, maybe it's not too late. Tears filled her eyes, but this time, they were happy ones. He reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. For the first time in years, Angela felt safe, and James knew, without a doubt, that his life had finally come full circle. He had found his family, and he wasn't going to lose his future. As weeks turned into months, James, Angela, and Elijah settled into their new reality. It wasn't always easy. Elijah struggled to adjust to his elite new school, and Angela, despite accepting a managerial position in one of James's businesses, still wrestled with her independence. One evening, James walked into the kitchen to find Angela sitting at the counter, staring at a job listing on her laptop. You're looking for another job? He asked, pouring himself a glass of wine. Angela sighed. James, I appreciate everything you've done, but I don't want to work for you forever. I want something of my own. He leaned against the counter. What do you want to do? She hesitated before answering. I've always wanted to open a community center, a place for single mothers, struggling families, people like Elijah and me, before we found you. James studied her for a moment, admiration in his eyes. Then let's do it. I'll invest in it, but you'll run it. It'll be yours. Angela looked up, eyes wide. You'd really do that? He smiled. Angela, I'd do anything to help you build the life you deserve. Father and son. Meanwhile, James worked to strengthen his bond with Elijah. The boy was still guarded, but there were moments when they played basketball, when James helped him with school projects, where a real father-son connection began to form. One afternoon, as they sat in the backyard, Elijah asked, Why didn't you and my mom stay together? James sighed. I was young, ambitious, and I thought leaving was the only way to make something of myself. I didn't know about you. If I had, I would have stayed. Elijah nodded slowly. I want to believe that. You don't have to believe me right away, James said. Just give me a chance to prove it. Elijah studied him before giving a small smile. Okay. A love reborn. Angela's community center became a reality within months, opening in a neighborhood where struggling families could find resources, job training, and childcare. Watching her work, James realized just how strong she had been all these years. One evening, after an event at the center, James walked Angela to her car. I'm proud of you, he said. She turned to him, her expression soft. I never stopped loving you, James. I just stopped believing we could have a future. His heart pounded. Do you believe it now? She hesitated, then nodded. I think I do. He took her hand. Then let's stop wasting time. Angela smiled, and for the first time in years, she felt at home, not just in James's mansion, but in his heart. James had spent his life building an empire, but now he was building something far more valuable, a family, a purpose, and a love he thought he had lost forever.